What we want to do is quickly cover overall trends and changes since COVID, obviously, but we don't want to dwell on overall trends and talk about in generalities. We want to jump into specific cases and talk about what's going on the ground. We want to talk about unexpected opportunities presenting themselves right now that investors are looking at. To talk about the industry shifts in general and how they affect startups, what to look for. We'll talk a little bit about the fundamentals and where they stand right now. And of course, we will cover specific examples and stories from the front lines. So we'll dive deep into the details. We will have open mic for elevator pitches. So if you want to do a quick elevator pitch for your startup in the biotech space, we will let you know when the opportunity comes. You will raise your hand. We'll pick a volunteer at random, and we'll unmute you, and you'll be able to pitch and get the quick Q&A and a quick feedback from our panelists. And again, we'll have Q&A during and after the panel discussion. So anytime, jump in, ask a question in the chat box, or raise your hand. We're happy to unmute you and have you talk. So just to start the discussion and set the stage, biotech in perspective, this is NASDAQ slide. Biotech is in green. You can see it's outperforming tech and SAP. The only one that is higher is genomics and immunobiopharma. So that's why investors are obviously interested in biotech. So nothing changed there. What is changing is obviously there has been a hit in funding. So we see that VC rounds in the US were down by 44% in the first 3 months. The biggest impact was on seed stage deals. They dropped by 57% in the first 3 months. And also size of investment, it's notable to see that it differs by industry. So for example, if we compare health to AI, data, travel, it looks very different. We see that health, the seed funding for health increased 18 to 19%, so did Series B. However, Series B increased only for health companies compared to others, but Series A was down in health. So those are quick trends, something that we observe. But now I would like to introduce my panelists, and then we'll jump straight into a discussion. David, would you like to start?
Yeah, hi, I'm David Friedman. I have 2 roles. Number one is I'm president of Tech Coast Angels in Orange County. And the second role is I'm a consultant with the Small Business Development Center. My background is tech and economics. I was in the tech space for years, and over the last 12 years, I've been doing the investing side of the business.
Thank you, David. Greg?
Hi, I'm Dr. Greg Buchert. My background is as a pediatric emergency physician, and for the past 25 years, I've been in a C-suite position in a health plan. And so I've been in Orange County for 30 years, and was one of the, led the all of outpatient services for CHOC for a number of years, and then moved over to be one of the founding executives for CalOptima. And so I'm here an interesting role. One is, I'm the new kid on the block, on the investing block. And so I've got a new perspective, and I feel like I'm one of those people that read the book backwards. I started on seeing a lot of companies in my role as a chief medical officer, a COO, or a CEO of a health plan. And now I'm going back to the beginning to see how they all got started, how they all got funded, and playing a role in that. So it's interesting to learn a whole new way of life, certainly a whole new jargon, and look forward to being on the panel today.
Thank you, Greg. Thank you, David. Again, great panel today. We'll start off just talking about the overall trends that you currently see on the ground, specifically what you're seeing. And I wanted to ask you about the activity level and the overall level of investment, the appetite for investment. What do you see now? How did it change when COVID just hit? Was there progression, and where is it ending? Where's it going? David, do you want to take a stab at that one?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I'm looking at your statistics and I'm saying, it kind of doesn't compute with ours, because we at TCA across the board, we have around 450 members. We have 5 chapters in Southern California, and our people are spread mostly in California, but some across the United States and even international. We have been doing, a really good job. In fact, we're ahead of where we were last year in terms of investments and deals. We have never been busier. And I think part of it has to do with, we invest individually, but we also have funds. We have a fund in San Diego, a fund in LA, and a fund in Orange County, as well as sidecar deals, where sidecar deals means we invest individually as well, along with the fund or separately. But we have not seen a slowdown. What we have seen is some moderation in the valuations. We have seen more participation with other angel groups. So when there's a good deal in one of the other groups, we syndicate with about 50 other groups, and we find syndication works to our advantage. So we can actually jump on the deal, fill out a round, and complete it. So the good news is, from our perspective, we're seeing great deal flow. We want to see more. We've invested a lot at pretty good valuations. And because we had been operating in a hybrid fashion, both in person as well as online, when we went to Zoom meetings or other kind of online meetings, we haven't had a slowdown at all. We haven't skipped a beat. I may need Greg to prescribe Valium after a while, but that's a different story.
David, have you seen a change in the size of investments?
Investments, I won't really know for sure. I'm trying to think what we have. Last year, our average investment in TCA was around $375,000. We may have seen a little smaller investment, and I think that's primarily due to the fact that we've seen more investments at the fund level. And our fund level, when we do a syndication, is about $100,000 plus sidecars. And when we do full diligence, it's about $250,000 plus sidecars. So because we've been active with the funds, we're seeing more investments through the fund, and therefore it seems to reduce the average size of the deal.
Greg, let me ask you what you're saying. Again, you're coming in as a new investor, and you're comparing it a little bit to what you had before when you were pitched not as an investor, but as a C-suite or chief medical officer. What are you seeing now on the ground?
It's interesting, Laura, because in addition to doing some other investments with Tech Coast Angels, I'm also doing some work as my role as a subject matter expert. And so there's a number of consulting companies that represent large investment firms and family funds, other things like that. And they'll basically reach out to pick people's brains. And so I figured that's actually, we're looking at what should I be investing in? And so that's kind of it gives me some insight into where they think the money is there to be made. And so there's a lot of emphasis on digital health, a lot of work in the area of telehealth now that has just exploded in the last umpteen years. And if people trying to take advantage of things such as the changes in payment methodology. Probably the best example is Medicare now makes it quite attractive for practices and primary care providers to do aggressive care management of their staff. And if they reach out to their individuals with their patients with chronic illnesses twice a month, they stand to get paid very, very handsomely. So all of a sudden there's a lot of focus on care management, some remote patient monitoring, some risk assessment, risk adjustment, and predictive modeling software. So it's sort of all in that spectrum is where I see a lot of things coming up, where people think that they can make an investment and make a difference.
So I wanted to see if we can run our first poll. Sam, are we able to run a poll right now? All right. So if answer, how many people have recently pitched to investors? We'll see what is happening with the audience. Do we have anyone actually pitching? And once we get some answers, Sam will display the results immediately, so we'll be able to see it. Wonderful. Given that we do have people who pitched, can we run the second poll? We wanted to see if you pitched, what was the reason, in your opinion, for the successful pitch, if it was a successful pitch? Again, was it your team, the strength of the team? Was it the opportunity, the market? Was it the product market fit? Was it your unique solution? Was it traction? Was it something else? So it looks like everyone thinks that their solution was the most unique, and that's why they were successful at pitching. Do we have any volunteers? We'll ask if anyone wants to raise their hand if they want to do a quick pitch. We'll open the mic. You can do pitch for your company, and we'll give you a quick feedback. So Sam, if you can see if anyone is raising their hand, if we have any volunteers, we'll do that. And I cannot see it, so Sam, can you let me know if anyone raised their hand to pitch?
I don't see anyone at the moment.
Okay. So what the people are thinking, we'll give you another chance later on to pitch if you want to volunteer. Greg?
Yeah, one of the things, another area where I was thinking as we're pondering here, when you figure that 1 out of 3 Californians have Medicaid as their insurance, and 50% of kids have Medicaid for their insurance. It's one of those things that, and this is a trend that's obviously going across the country, certainly something that has been an increase during the last 6 months with, unfortunately, a challenging economy, more people getting on Medicaid. It's interesting to see some products being designed for that population. And when I say designed, what I'm looking at, one is definitely a lot more focus on some cultural competence, looking at the change in the face of the United States. One is looking at how do you help people get access, and also some of the products that are really addressing some of the social determinants of health. And so really moving into some of the things such as housing, nutrition, education, employment, other things such as that. And it's I think that there's actually a loosely formed trade association, if you will, called Health Tech for Medicaid that's looking to help startup companies get into that space. And as a purchaser, I can tell you that as a chief medical officer, as I get pitched for these great solutions, it's easy to make an ROI decision when somebody's pitching for a commercial population, because as a health plan person, a lot of it's looking at how do we save money? And if I can save roughly $10,000 a day for a commercial patient, it's an easier sell than if I can save $5,000 for a Medicare patient and maybe $2,000 for a Medicaid patient. And so something has to be 5 times more effective to have that same ROI for a Medicaid population. So often the pitches are made to the commercial population. But as you look at where the patients and how the patients are insured now compared to where they might have been in the past, I've seen some changing dynamics around that.
Greg, that brings me to a question about the sort of the fundamentals that sometimes startups do not understand around insurances, and you and I talked about it, because we have a lot of startups really not grasping how they can position their value proposition, and assuming that something will be attractive to a payer, when in fact the payer is not even involved in the decision. And I know you have some stories of around that. So I wanted to just touch on that because I think it would be informative for everyone. And maybe, if there are any changes, then maybe address the changes that are happening. But sort of go back to the fundamentals that usually startups miss. There's some misunderstanding, obviously, what payers would look at, what they won't, which decisions they're even involved in, which ones are not.
Well, I'd say first is you got to get in the door. And a cold call often isn't good enough unless you've got somebody that's a real warm heart that list this to everybody because I can tell you as the CEO of Blue Shield Promise Health Plan most recently, I would probably get 20 to 30, either LinkedIn emails, cold call emails, something like that about the great product. And so there's a lot of competition out there. And so I'd say if somebody has any type of insight, some way to have an introduction from somebody that they know at the company would be number one. Number two is, since we're talking about life sciences, chances are they're going to be pitching to the chief medical officer. And he or she is generally going to be the easiest to sell. They can understand why it's a good thing, how it brings value, if it does. But as he or she then has to sell it internally. And so a pitch should really be not just for the medical benefits, but it should be a pitch that's also designed for the chief financial officer, the chief information officer, and the chief human resource officer, because those are the three departments that hold the key to the resources. And so as a CMO, I might say something's really great, but I've got to convince a lot of other people in order to invest. And the other thing is that budgets are usually set once a year. And so even if something is wonderful that comes up that I see in October, November, the budget is set for 2021, chances are I can't get it into the budget until the 2022 budget. And so the time frames are long. So there's a lot of maneuvering within an organization, and you need a lot of patience. Yep, you're muted, Laura.
Oops.
You're muted.
Now that you're evaluating startups as an investor, as opposed to being on the other side, do you always start with who the pitch will be tailored to once the startup goes out to sell? Because I find that that probably is one issue that sometimes is not covered well in pitches to investors. And someone assumes they would throw in that they will go and pitch and try to sell to the health plans as well as to the clinicians, hospital systems, and they try to cover it, sort of blanket it, that will go and pitch to everyone. Now, you know that some products are not pitchable, let's say to the payers.
Yeah, and actually I think one of the important things is to know is who's going to pay for the service. And California is probably one of the toughest markets to pitch in because here we have just a plethora of these capitated delegated groups. And as we're looking at groups like Monarch, Healthcare Partners, other groups like that, they're the ones who often have the risk, and often health plans have passed responsibility for providing that care, providing for the services down to those groups. And from a practical point of view, for my 400,000 Medicaid patients that I had in Los Angeles and San Diego, I was contracted with 41 different IPAs or medical groups. And they were the ones that people would have to make the pitch to, not to me, because I'm not the one paying for the service. I've already prepaid somebody to do that. So that's probably one of the first questions they ask is, who's going to pay me? And that's going to vary dramatically across the country, area by area and state by state.
David, do you have any specific examples of recent investments that were either a very good pitch or a very bad pitch, where startups tried to perhaps either tailor to COVID needs, where they missed the mark?
Yeah, it fundamentally comes out to the same whether or not they include COVID. I mean, we were all sensitive to the fact COVID existed, so we were actually looking for opportunities, around the March, April timeframe where we can actually fast track something to get funding for things relating to COVID. We've seen some companies pivot from doing liquid biopsy cancer to doing screening for COVID. But the reality is the good pitches all have something in common. And I think that's probably as instructive, and that goes from the medical device to the biopharma, to the, to software, to anything else that we invest in. And that is, if you're pitching to, and it was funny because when I saw the results, team and product never came up, which I thought was real interesting since, we always invest in the team. That's our
David seemed to have frozen. David, your audio?
Yep, I'm frozen. Am I now back?
You good? Good now?
Well, I'm going to put an unsolicited Cox. This is from Cox Cable, so you might, do whatever you want with that one. But again, when I saw your results, the team didn't come out as anything, neither did product market opportunity.
We have David, your audio froze again, so you might want to pick up the phone and call Cox provider again. But we have a question from the audience. How much does payer mix impact your due diligence assessment? I guess I would probably start with the initial pitch, but then also address how does it affect due diligence?
And I would say that I think the product actually is surely going to be more important than the payer mix. It's got to start with a good product and a good team. And as David's calling in, it's interesting. One of the metaphors that's used is that I hear so often as people are reviewing pitches is they've got a good horse, but they've got a bad jockey. And so the horse or the product is good, but the team really can't ride that horse well and really bring it to success. And so but as far as payer mix, you figure health insurance companies are going to pretty much pay for all services. There are probably going to be some more unique services that are available for perhaps in the Medicaid population as opposed to the commercial population. If it's going to be a very expensive product, then you might be specifically going to the commercial population, and often there's going to be a quicker turnaround for that group than it is for the more of the publicly funded areas like Medicare or Medicaid. You're muted again, Laura.
Trying to be a good citizen and mute myself in the middle.
Yeah, I'm back, by the way.
Oh, good. Then I can pick on you again. As far as pitches go and who the customer is, are you seeing more products targeted at hospitals and providers or payers?
Yeah, I'm not seeing a lot of product at payers. We are looking at an RTLS, remote tracking location system. Currently, it's in due diligence for the hospital market. But we're seeing a variety of things come up in terms of medical, pharma, bio. I'll give you a couple. These are the areas that seem to be hot, and mostly because we're seeing an increase in insurance, cost of insurance. So we're seeing more people take it upon themselves to be able to manage, their health, to reduce their copay, to reduce the visits to the hospital, to reduce their drug costs. And you just saw with Apple 6 Watch, they just put a pulse ox meter into their new iWatch 6. But we're seeing devices, we're seeing remote management, we're seeing more teledoc, all precipitated by COVID-19. We're also seeing some more and better diagnostic tests, particularly in terms of CAR-T, particularly in terms of liquid biopsy. So we're seeing a change in things somewhat due to what's happening in insurance and the cost of insurance, also the demands because of the environment or because of the aging of America. We're going to have 1 billion in the world, 1 billion people over 65 by 2030. So as the people get older, they're more prone to diabetes, they're more prone to cancer, they're more prone to illnesses. And therefore, when you couple that with the technology today with management by cell phone, management by app, telediagnostics, remote medicine, you're seeing a very clear switch over. But it all goes back down to what Greg was saying before. The pitch has to be very clear to who the target is, who's paying it. There are a variety of people involved in the ecosystem, but you really need to define very clearly, is Greg paying for it, or is, maybe Aetna Insurance Company, whoever that is. Now, when we do look at things coming out, this is the final point that I'll give up the floor to my other colleagues, but when you see a pitch come in where there's a reimbursement code available, or where there's prior art, which makes the FDA clearance process a lot quicker, those are things that light up our eyes because it makes it easier.
Speaking of FDA, because of COVID, have you seen any effect on clinical trials, and therefore investors looking at clinical trials as either a hindrance or extending the timeline of the investment, or affecting the size of investment, or even attractability?
Yeah, we haven't seen a real difference. I haven't seen it. I'll look to Greg. He may have seen different deals than I have, but I haven't really seen a difference in this post-COVID, in this during COVID environment versus pre or post. We're very sensitive to the FDA and the FDA trials and the reimbursement codes. And if you have them, it de-risks the investment for us, makes it easier for us. But we're certainly not seeing shortcuts to do something and put something into the market without, at least from a biopharma medical point of view, sooner than it should be. We're seeing other technology being used because people want to be aware of what they have. And so we're seeing more arrhythmia, so therefore we're seeing more applications like Cardia or Zeopatch to take, to help the people determine if they're finding something. But they have prior art, so it makes it easier for them to get approved. And therefore, it's easier for us to invest because of the certainty of when it's going to get in the market. Greg, you want to comment on that as well? Be my guest.
Sure. Yeah, David. I think one of the challenges that came up with public health emergency is that the FDA did have a moratorium on some of the clinical trials. And so certain trials were suspended and other trials weren't started yet. And I have no doubt that that'll go back to some sense of normalcy, and now there's more flexibility around any kind of product that can say it's going to help in COVID-19. I think where it makes some difference is it might change some of the financial projections and push out the development a little bit longer, a little bit later. And so I think there might be some hesitancy to invest, knowing that an investment isn't going to pay off for maybe an additional 6 months or so because of that timing.
I wanted to shift gears and ask you about anything that you see that is unexpected, that is as far as opportunities. So there's always the expected, everyone is chasing COVID directly, as far as cures, as far as diagnostics. But what is happening sort of in the shadows because of COVID that creates different opportunities that are just plain unexpected? Have you seen any pitches where it surprised you, or have you seen any needs, clinical needs that popped up because of that were not obvious?
Yeah. It's funny. I'm not sure it's unexpected. It just may be a sign of the times, but I'm seeing a lot more apps to do with mental health. Seeing, things like Calm. I'm seeing more apps, coming up that will enable you to do stress reduction because everyone's on Zoom calls from morning till night. I'm seeing more apps and types of products for exercise, seeing more, for example, Mira, for exercise, or, competitors to Peloton. So I'm seeing more in mental health. We're seeing more ways to diagnose and help people with mental health as well. And that goes not only into the patient diagnosis, but in the apps that are enabling people to find the right entity to help them combat mental illness. We've seen a few of those deals come up over the last years. It has nothing to do with COVID. It's just a sign of the times, I think.
Is COVID just accelerating on?
I think COVID accelerates some things. It accelerates certainly the diagnostics and the delivery. I mean, we're seeing, for example, over the last few days, Johnson & Johnson said they're testing drone delivery. I think CVS is going to test, delivery of medicine, not CVS. One of the groups are testing delivery of medicine by drones into remote areas to get the population equipped to deal with a pandemic or other illnesses. So they're not unexpected. It's sort of a natural evolution, but it may be emphasized, or we may become more aware of it or sensitive to it because of COVID-19.
And, and I'd say a couple of things that I've seen is, one is, I'm going to go back to the money. When telehealth, when they made changes during this public health emergency to reimburse telehealth at the same amount as a face-to-face visit, dramatic increase, I'd say a 10-year advance in telehealth over the last 6 months with regard to its acceptance and adoption. The other thing is that now that people know that they can actually not have to travel 5 miles or 50 miles to go to their doctor or get a visit or something like that, it kind of changes some of the perspectives. And so I think these whole concepts of remote patient monitoring and patient management at home are becoming increasingly popular. And then there are I think the unexpected opportunities that come up. And specifically, one that I would bring up is a company that I'm aware of called Maui Imaging. They have an incredible new technology that really will rival MRIs and CT scans using an ultrasound type of technology. And the interesting thing about them is they can actually visualize through bone. And, so they're kind of moving on this, they were moving on one path. And then they found that when they were doing some of their studies, that the CT scans that they were comparing against were always occupied because that was what was used for staging the COVID patients. And the patients that needed other kind of scans, they couldn't get them. So they raised their hand and said, hey, let's switch gears, let's be flexible, and let's use our technology in different ways. And so I think there are opportunities for people to be opportunistic and look for those times when they can flex and be more productive.
Since we talked about telemedicine, Sam, I know we had a poll asking about telemedicine visits. If you're able to pull up that poll, I'd like to ask the audience, how many of you had a telemedicine visit since COVID?
How about multiple telemedicine visits through COVID? I mean, my daughter, the doctor would not see my daughter, even though she doesn't have COVID, because of the COVID crisis. So they're making her call in to do things by telemedicine. They're actually, if they don't have the right system, they're just getting on a Zoom conference call. It's kind of interesting. So that is really something that we never really thought about.
Okay, well, let's look at the results. 69% had a telemedicine.
Wow.
So in relationship to telemedicine, I think one of the things that that I wanted to talk about is everyone just mentions telemedicine. So everyone wants to run after that sort of category. But what specifically is missing right now where there's a need in the market that hasn't been addressed perhaps? Or is there something interesting in telemedicine that you have seen lately that is not just pure, how can we do visit better, integrated with scheduling, integrated with EMR?
I'd say one of the things that I see that's missing is a good connection with the with the electronic health record. So many people have adopted new technologies out of necessity to be able to communicate with their patients. But, here's the telemedicine visit over here, and here's their EMR, and somebody has to move one to the other. And I don't think that's been done seamlessly, and if at all. And even things such as electronic consults between DCPs and specialists, most of the systems today still are two different systems. Somebody has a question from their EHR, they go over and put it into their e-consult, get the answer, come back and put it into the EHR. And so I think that integration of multiple devices, multiple technologies is one of those things that still has to come.
Yeah, and I think, Greg, I think you're absolutely correct with the integration. I mean, it would be not only integration with the doctor's office, but the other people involved in care. If you're looking at an integrative approach to, you know, solving a problem, I mean, like for cancer care or for, you know, bodily, you know, for orthopedic, because you need so many different types of people. They don't have that integration at this time.
And Greg, you and I talked also, because you were involved with CalOptima, we were talking about different categories of population, including homeless. And I don't know if you want to just mention that, and any opportunities or any changes that you have seen, any technologies that came up, solutions.
Yeah, I think, you know, the challenges of the homeless are going to be with them specifically, but with all of us for, I think, for quite some time to come. Probably the most exciting thing I've seen come up recently there is that there was an architect who developed a modular house that's made with you know, new types of building materials, some kind of polyurethane building materials that are lined, and these homes can be put up in a matter of a half a day by unskilled laborers. They are the lowest cost alternative to anything that's out there in the market. You can put 3 of these homes, if you will, in a container, shipping container from a truck. And so all of a sudden opens up a lot of possibilities of how to create low-cost housing that will provide the electricity, the heat, the safety, and there will be a couple that'll be pilots being started in El Monte next month, and then 140 homes going into Victorville earlier next year. I think it could be a game changer. And then it's interesting because when you start talking about the homeless, you start thinking about other activities, and we've got to look no further than the last couple of weeks with the firestorms, the hurricanes, the floods, that people need housing immediately, and to be able to have something like this that can go up in a disaster zone, I think it creates some really interesting opportunities.
Are you seeing governments, state level or federal level, where the government is willing to pay for certain solutions that perhaps startups can take advantage of?
They're starting, but it's, you know, I think one of the challenges whenever you start getting these publicly funded groups involved is there are so many people that are in their ears, ranging from the advocates, the people they have to execute, the other policymakers, and just flat out politics and different perspectives on what people should be spending money on. One gets in the way. 2 is that there's complications with funding streams. And what I mean by that, I mean, one of the, you know, as I said, my background is a pediatric emergency physician. And in Medicaid for kids, and here Medi-Cal covers 50% of kids. If I'm a health plan, I've got responsibility for a certain amount of that child's care. But if a kid's got a chronic condition, then it's California Children's Services that's paying for it. If they've got a behavioral health condition, it may be the county paying for it. And then there's also dental care. There's regional centers for intellectual and developmental disabled. There's dental care, and there's still fee for service. And so you might have 7 different funding streams for one kid's care. And so who do you approach? And so it gets incredibly complex as you start going back to those layers of the onion.
So speaking of government, when you are looking at startups right now, because of so much funding being poured into the system, which is COVID related, the grants that are being applied for, are you pushing startups to search those opportunities, search them out, and try to go for that non-diluted funding before you invest, or are you doing it in parallel? Is that a conversation? Is that an issue? Anything around that?
David, I'll toss that one over the fence to you.
Yeah, I mean, certainly I would rather not see diluted funding. If you can get a grant or something, that would be really good. In addition, not only do you get the money, you get the expertise to go with it, and that expertise is a correlate to reducing our risk. The issue is, you know, and it's interesting, in a lot of the deals that we look at in medical, then I'm going to turn it back to Greg, maybe give an experience with Makani. which is a really great example, and it's a real live experience that we're completing today. But what we would really like to, what we see in the medical area, be it mostly in biopharma, diagnostics, these companies are getting taken out real early. So having non-dilutive money up front gives us a better opportunity at a higher multiple, because they don't have to go for successive rounds of funding. But I think there's a really great example that Greg was the team lead on from Makani. If you can just share that, I think I'm jumping you over, but I just think it's instructive. I think it's really good for the group. And you did a great job, by the way. I think you need that those public kudos.
Oh, thank you. And so, yeah, it was the, in medicine, we've got a phrase of see one, do one, teach one. Well, I joined Tech Coast Angels, they just said, do one. And so the see and teach weren't quite part of it. But this is a great Orange County story. It's an Orange County company. They've got, they did a lot of the research and have licenses from UCI. It's has some funding from from CoaXL, and they came to Tech Coast Angels. They have a respiratory monitor that provides real-time monitoring of depth of respiration, and I think what we'll be seeing is actually a new vital sign, because it's for somebody that is getting kind of conscious sedation, potentially some various disease states, potentially sleep apnea, other things such as that. It's a really nice, low-cost way of doing things and monitoring somebody's respiratory rate, and it's a much better predictor of respiratory failure than pulse oximetry or some of the methodologies that we use now. But due diligence has been interesting because some people talk about it being 20 hours, 30 hours. We're talking 80, 100 hours of man hours. And it wasn't all by it, but luckily I've had some great mentors and coaches along the way. But people dig really, really, really deep. And it's interesting that it's great having a number of people on a due diligence team, because everybody has their passion. For some, it's going to be the finance. For some, it's going to be the return. Some, it's going to be the team. And what's the reliability of, how sure are we that the founders are going to stay with it? What about the intellectual property and the patents, and how defensible are they? Is there a market? When can you change behavior? And so people are asking questions all over the place and trying to capture them, trying to answer the questions, and working with the startup company to give the best answers to those. It's been a very interesting experience. But I think the bottom line is having a number of perspectives, looking at a company, and the company scrambling to be responsive to the requests of those that are asking the questions and giving honest answers. If there's that's something I've seen on some of the pitches, that people kind of skirting the issue, or else they act like they're on a Sunday morning meet the press, and they just they get asked a tough question, they just bridge to something else, some other topic, instead of actually answering the question. And I think a straight answer goes a long way.
Do you see some instances where startups perform brilliant during the pitch, and then they completely fail in due diligence? Any big, we'll love to hear about the big fail.
Yeah, well, we're not going to tell you where, but we've seen them do really great in their elevator pitch, real exciting. Then they go to pre-screen and they can't get the story right. So when you're really looking at it from the entrepreneur point of view, the most important thing is going in a sequence of events, get your elevator pitch right, and make sure the context is there. Build the relationship with who you're going to pitch to. If, for example, if you're developing something and you're pitching to Greg, he's a doctor of pediatric emergency medicine, see how the relationship of what you're doing relates to what he's doing. If you know that I'm not a doctor, but a techie, make sure you build that relationship in the transition and then tell the story.
What do
But I think that's really important.
But David,
It's interesting. I'll share a personal story of a failure. And 20 years ago, I had actually left CalOptima for a couple of years to be the number 3 person with a startup company because I was just so overwhelmed by the founder of the company, and he had just great ideas. He's one of those people that he not only solved problems that nobody else saw, he had a solution to that problem. And just a fascinating person to be with. He assembled a board of really impressive individuals that are really world-class leaders. The challenge was, and as we pitched, there's a lot you can do with a persuasive PowerPoint and a charismatic personality where there may not be a whole lot of substance behind it. And that's quite frankly where we were, because my lesson learned was that having a chief technology officer who also is the founder, who is also the chairman of the board, and also the largest stockholder, can determine where things go in the company. And we invented like crazy. We got a lot of patents, but never brought anything to the market. The company blew up because there just wasn't revenue. So let's go beyond the pitch.
Yeah, and to follow on that, going back to the earlier, posting, team never came up. But when you make the pitch, we want to make sure that what you're saying in terms of the use of our money, how are you going to spend, what's the use of funds, how are you going to execute your plan? That becomes really critical. That's why it was real surprising to see no one put team up there for success, but the team, the successful operation, the ability of the team to work together, the ability of the team to execute and show the credentials for execution, the pitch showing traction of how it's getting from where it was as a kernel of an idea into a proof of concept, into, an early phase of commercialization. All those have to be there, but the team, has to be up there.
David, do you think though that that's just a subjective perception? They think that they won or succeeded because of the uniqueness of the product, where in fact investors had a completely different take on it, why they invested?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. I think we see many companies come in, and I'm sure Greg can smile as well, that say we have no competition. Trust me, there's always competition. When we put internet in the airplanes, we thought we were competing against other entertainment systems, and the people said, no, you're competing against my sleeping and eating habits. So I'm just telling you, there's competition on almost everything you do, including using manual processes today to replace electronic health records, for example. I'm not saying it's the right thing to do, but the management team has to be aware of, all these little pieces and make sure they align the rest of the group, be the rest of the management team or the people they hire to get the execution done correctly, because that's where most of these things fail. In execution, non-pivoting, arrogance, so to speak. We know what the answer is. We're not going to change.
And it's interesting, David, I've been impressed with, as I sit through a lot of pitches now, the number of people who respond to the personality of the person making the pitch. And that alone, I think, will turn off quite a few investors when they do with that arrogant individual who says, I know everything, and I'm smart, you're dumb, whatever it may be, or how they come across. I think they lose a lot of investments that way.
Yeah, and that's why the guys at McConaughey came across as humble. They listened. They were able to communicate. You exchanged ideas. I thought that was, that whole McConaughey deal could be a real great case study of what you do right from both ends, from the investor end and from the entrepreneur end.
Yeah, and just to point out, the CEO of McConaughey is Dr. Francis Duhay, who was the chief medical officer at Edwards Lifesciences, and has an incredible number of accomplishments to his credit. And he's one of those people that, if you read his bio, you'd say, wow, what an impressive person. And you'd say, I'm not worthy to even interface with that guy. I'll tell you, I'm getting emails from him at 11 at night, at 3 in the morning, all those things that just been incredibly responsive, and it's been it will be a fantastic partnership.
David, I'm going to ask you a question, even though I know, I think I know the answer. Number one priorities for investments, and I know team is at the top. But number two, number three priorities, anything changed now? Are there any changes in, beyond the team? Are you focused a little bit more on the type of a product? Are you looking for something different that was before the priority when you evaluated investments?
Yeah, I don't really see a difference in the categories. And I think what you're referring to is number one thing is team, the number two thing is opportunity, the number three is product market mix, the number four is IP, the number five is I think sales and marketing, the number six is competition, number seven is everything else. They may shift around on the bottom part, but the top has remained fairly, consistent over time. So really haven't seen a real big change in that.
One of the things that I saw in a couple of pitches people have made is they don't tell that they're pitching to investors. Investors are there to make some money, and in the pitch it never says, how is my audience ever going to make some money? And so the pitches fell flat if they don't address some of that. And when they're enamored by the product and not with how am I going to make some money, or how are the people that I'm taking their money going to make some money, if that's not addressed, that's a missed opportunity.
I think the other, correct me if I'm wrong, but especially because there's so much hype right now about what's more attractive, what's less attractive to investors, that startups sometimes start focusing on what does investor want to hear. And they forget that investors actually listening directly or internally as to what the healthcare company would say, what is the buyer, and what is changing in healthcare and in the value that they demand. It's really not about the investor preferences changing. It's the preferences of the buyers of the healthcare.
Yeah. So it's interesting there are certain buzzwords that we look at that are hackneyed, they're overused. You come to us with blockchain, we roll our eyes at this point. You come to us with cannabis, we say, we'll take a sample and then we'll call you, tomorrow. But the reality is what we want to be able to hear is a really good story. We don't really care where the market space is, but there are certain areas like AI in medicine. I mean, you and I were involved with Chalk at one time, if you recall, with Anthony Chang, and AI in medicine is something that we know exists. We've invested in companies like that. So we're seeing AI with augmented reality in the operating theater, where orthopedic surgeons now can get a clear view in a holographic image of the field that they're operating in, and therefore translate that to the actual patient. We're seeing things relating to telemedicine, remote medicine, remote diagnostics. Diagnostics is a big area. Liquid biopsies are a big area. So we're primed to listen to those more intently when those things come up. At least that's where my mind is. Anything to do with gene therapy, gene splicing, gene enabling, gene transformation, those things are transformative technologies that may play a role and therefore give us the best return on early investments. And we won't necessarily invest in only one company. We'll invest in multiple companies because we really don't know where they are. Things relating to glaucoma, we invested in a company called Idaptic. They have a medical device, a technology that allows people to, in a sense, augment their own vision. It can complement drug therapy. So again, certain things that we're interested in come up because we see the technology enabling, those medical advances in devices and, biopharma. I don't know if Greg wants to add to that, how you look at it. That's how I look at it.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I actually always sort of laugh at myself that as a physician and knowing, these diseases, knowing the technologies, knowing what's out there and the treatments now, I'll admit I usually shy away from some of these disease treatments and these disease cures because I know it's complicated, it's time consuming, and and I'll go to a little bit more to my position of comfort, where I'm looking at how do we increase the efficiency of the system? How do we reduce cost in the system? How do we reduce friction in the system? So I'm often looking more at some of those things that might be able to decrease ER visits, stays in hospitals, increase patient empowerment, other things like that, as opposed to the actual treatments. And so, I'm sure we all look, I know we all look through things where are different lenses in our positions of comfort.
Have you seen any interesting products that were consumer oriented, meaning it's patient oriented and B2C, as opposed to going to as a B2B model, trying to sell to the hospital?
So one fun one I've seen just recently is a company called Biospectral, and they use a cell phone, and literally all you do is put your fingers there, and it tells you your blood pressure like within 5 seconds. And that's, you don't think of it, it's like, oh, gosh, I can get a $30 monitor that from Rite Aid, but to be able to get that and have it on your cell phone, so it's already embedded in that computer to transmit to whoever needs to see it, is helpful. And as you think about the worldwide applicability of people that are, when they're traveling, when they may not have a lot of resources, and again, I spent so much of my life in the Medicaid space that the use of smartphones by low-income individuals is identical to those of anybody that are, presenting or on the call. And so they have that diagnostic tool in their hand.
Any changes in the attractiveness of B2B versus B2C business model?
That's an interesting question. I'm not sure I've seen the answer. I mean, I haven't really seen a big difference, but just thinking about it, if you deal with hospitals and you deal with the big medical companies, it is a harder sell, but a better sell. To be able to sell to the consumer is a harder sell. Consumers want things cheaper, and the ability to build a brand and having consumer products, you can have multiple ways to get that. Just think about, thermoscan thermometers, for example. It was a great idea, and all of a sudden everyone's going after the consumer space. The Chinese came in, reduced the price of that. Very low margin, you have to get real massification. But if I can develop a B2B product, for example, the Makani, product, goes into the hospitals, or, an augmentation to the Da Vinci, for maybe orthopedic fractures. It may be harder to sell, but I think the sale is a better sale and gives you a higher margin. So, it's 6 to 1, half a dozen of another. But my preferences go to B2B than B2C because I think the margins are better. But again, individual cases.
Greg, have you seen any changes in reimbursement? In the sense that consumers are actually more willing to pay out of pocket instead of waiting and expecting reimbursement by the plan?
Not really. I think that, and I think it's really going to be based on somebody's wealth level, that those that have discretionary income are always trading off, is it worth it for me to spend money, to save money, to potentially do something else? And that's going to be an easier decision versus somebody's making that decision of, do I invest in something or do I put food on the table? And so I don't know that I've seen a lot of change in behavior.
Sam, are we able to open mics for anyone who wants to do a pitch? We'll ask them to raise their hand at this point, or ask live questions. We'll unmute.
Versus dead questions? I'm trying to understand the relationship here.
Say it again.
No, I was making a joke. You said live questions.
Always count on you.
I'm not seeing anything at the moment, but if anyone would like to participate in the open mic, please feel free to use the raise hand function or send it to the chat.
Thank you, Sam. David or Greg, I want to shift gears to talk about what shifts in perception that are currently happening that are perhaps influencing startups in the biotech space. And by that, I mean things like even telemedicine. I know that on one hand, it's just a clinical decision, right? Now, deciding to go on telemedicine route. But also because of the shift in perception by the consumer, by the patient, all of a sudden, whereas before telemedicine visit was considered a second choice. If I can go to see the doctor, I would rather go see the doctor. Now there's that shift in perception. So it's not even an industry shift. It's more a shift in perception. And the same with social distancing, again, Zoom calls. Are there any things that you see which you describe as a shift in perception versus shift in the industry, healthcare industry, and its value?
I think it's a shift in reality based upon COVID-19. I mean, people, the doctors don't want to see sick patients, and the sick patients don't want to necessarily get out of the house and see the doctor. So I think it's precipitated by the fact that there is an illness and a pandemic out there, and people want to be able to be careful. If somebody came up with a device, just throwing out some idea, and I was thinking about this, that would use a sensor that's attached to your iPhone or smartphone and tell me the volume of COVID-19 particles within 6 feet of me, I would really like to know that. And you probably can make a fortune for that because it's extensible to a variety of other illnesses. So because we don't know what's airborne, the CDC keeps flip-flopping at 6 feet, 3 feet, not important in the air. If it's sunny, it's not important. California, it's not important. If you're in a protest, it doesn't count. I mean, just garbage like that. So, and we actually have seen, based upon this is actually perception. Somebody came to me and said, I have this really great idea. I'm putting an app on my smartphone to tell me when I'm within 6 feet of somebody else. I said, my comment was, interesting idea, but if I open my eyes, I can usually approximate the 6 feet. So it was, I told them, go back to the drawing board, but there's something in that kernel of where they're going that makes sense, so there's a geometric boundary. So I think that does make sense, but I don't think the way they presented it was the right one. Their elevator pitch didn't resonate. But it's reality, not perception at this time. I think we're all very, especially sitting in September versus, if you asked that question in February, March, I would have had probably a different answer.
And it's interesting as you look at the statistics that are coming out of office practices, clinics, hospitals. You saw a huge uptick in the telehealth adoption, and as offices opened up and would see patients, that's decreased. But it seems like we're reaching that steady state of that's definitely far higher than it used to be, as far as patients willing to make or desiring to make telehealth visits as opposed to showing up in person. And I was recently talking to one of a hospital CEO of a busy hospital, and his comment was just one I just haven't gotten out of my mind yet, was that he thinks so many hospitals will go out of business as a result of this, because if you follow the path of people start with, instead of going to an emergency department, I can get a telehealth visit. And if I don't go to the emergency department, I'm less likely to be admitted. If I'm less likely to be admitted, there's going to be many fewer beds filled, and hospitals may indeed start suffering as a result. And so it all starts with the change of how a patient engages with his or her physician, or which physician they engage with.
That raises a societal issue, though, because the GDP when you look at our GDP, I think it's GDP, not GMP, 17% of that money goes into healthcare. When you look at Singapore, it's 4%. And we tend to be in the United States a little more unhealthy for a variety of reasons, a little more diabetes, a little more cancer. I do think that you're finding, given what we have today, by some things that are happening in in the world with telemedicine, remote diagnostics, wellness, I think you may see an effect on the hospital. You know, maybe hospitals do close, or maybe, you know, they turn into, their offerings change more into health, you know, health and wellness, not necessarily curative for disease. But I think, you know, I think overall, from a societal view, seeing the healthcare expenses reduced and the premiums reduced and the out-of-pocket reduced to a lot of people will be good for our economy, even though it may not be exactly great for the CEOs of some of the multiple hospital chains. I'm just thinking out loud. I'm not making any, you know, I'm not making a bet on it at this point, but I was just looking at the stats last night on admissions, and people, especially the poor, the indigent, go to the emergency room because no one will get turned away, and that's a place for respite in a sense. You know, so it's an interesting question societally, though.
Yeah, and it's interesting, as you know, Laura mentioned payment a little bit earlier. I think one of the things is that, you know, you always have this battle between fee-for-service, volume-based business versus value-based business. And you look at the physicians, the different types of medical practices, and even hospitals who were capitated, got prepaid. They've done very well for the last 6 months because whether somebody shows up or not, they're getting paid. And I'm sure that you're looking at some of the medical practices, medical groups, and even hospitals saying, hey, maybe it's time to change that model to, if I'm not going to have people filling my beds, maybe I should get paid for keeping people healthy and focus more on keeping, you know, on the community, improving community health, and keeping them out of my hospital, and do better financially from that practice, as opposed to hoping a lot of people show up and fill my beds.
But isn't that also true, Greg? Because there's a quality of care metric for reimbursement, I thought. So in other words, if you go in for an operation and you don't go back because you have a relapse, or you don't have a relapse for a disease like C. diff or something, you know, isn't there a penalty or an advantage or a bonus for keeping people on a high quality of healthcare?
Yeah, there's a penalty for readmission. So somebody actually gets in the hospital, gets a service, gets out, and then comes back within 30 days, there's a penalty there. But if they were prepaid and somebody didn't have to go to the hospital in the first place, then, you know, the diabetes was under control, their asthma, the congestive heart failure was under control, and they had that partnership between the hospitals and the outpatient physicians to keep people healthy and out of the hospital, then under a prepayment situation, they would do better.
Are you seeing any opportunities for more lifestyle medicine approaches, more integrated health, functional medicine, those businesses and services that service them growing?
Yeah, I know David mentioned a couple earlier that, you know, I think some of the things focused on that lifestyle medicine, focused on home exercise or other tools like that, and, you know, personal monitoring, personal wear, and I think that there's definitely some opportunities there. And it also goes back to, I think, under this COVID-19, people have realized the fact that every time they go into an office, chances are they're being around some sick people, and if they can stay out of that office, it might be better for them.
I've seen two startups that I think, David, you're aware of. That was an interesting on you know, staying away from patient from others. One was automated medication dispenser system. You remember that, David, right?
Yep.
And so that eliminated the interaction between, let's say, the pharmacist and the patient, or you know, the same thing, getting medication at the doctor's office. The other one was in-home testing, lab testing, where and it was a cash-based business model, not reimbursed yet by insurance. At least in the startup business model, it was not, insurance was not integrated. But the idea was that people are more willing to pay to have someone come in their house and draw their blood or take a sample, whereas before they were not as likely to pay for that. They would much rather just go to the lab and get it done there and save money.
Yeah, you know, it's funny you should mention the mobile services, because my daughter wound up with, I think, something like a strep. So the latest thing is a mobile IV infusion business that the celebrities and the athletes, you know, seem to love. It's got like 95 Yelp ratings of 5. So for $399, she can get a cocktail for immune health, for, you know, mood change. So you're seeing a lot of those things pop up. You're seeing another one, automated dispensing in doctor's offices. This is a company that's located around the Aliso Viejo area. So it's like a Horn and Hardart. No one knows what the hell that is anymore. But, you know, a dispensary where you can go and put money in like you would buy, you know, candy out of a candy machine. And the doctor prescribes something, and this system is set up so you can actually get your medicine with an unlock code that the doctor gives, because they know 80% of the time they're going to prescribe amoxicillin, or they're going to prescribe Flexeril, or they're going to prescribe whatever. So we're seeing those things come about where the technology is intersecting with the operationalization of how things are done. And it's crossing over, so the doctor's not just a doctor. The doctor becomes a doctor, pharmacist, you know, caregiver. And I think the integrative medicine is really a key. I think people want to be able to see that. And I think the new rules in doctoring, or at least what I'm hearing about from these associations, they require more participation by the patient with a better dialogue with the doctor to get a better outcome. You know, I'm always like that. I don't, no offense, Greg, but I don't trust doctors when they say try something. They're not kidding. They want me to try it. And I want to have a dialogue of what the effects are and what the options are. So a lot of things are coming together, and a lot of it has to do with medicine and healthcare, and I love it. I love this business, even though I'm not a doctor, I'm not in the healthcare market. I invest in it.
No, it's interesting, this whole concept of adherence and getting patients to do things, because, you know, as we, you know, we're all people, and we say, boy, I can have this, I can take this pill for my diabetes and it might help me 20 years from now, or I can have this candy bar right now. A lot of people say, I'll take the candy bar and skip the pills. And that's how do you enhance that adherence? And so, I mean, one of the interesting companies I've seen is a company called Wellth, W-E-L-L-T-H, where they take that behavioral economic perspective of saying, instead of doing what health plans have typically done, or, you know, other practices have done, we're saying, we'll pay you $25 if you get your immunization or you get your mammogram, whatever. They give them a preloaded card with money, and as long as they send in their blood pressure, their blood sugar reading, their hand with a picture of the meds that they're about to stick in their mouth, they keep the money. If they don't send it in, they lose, like, if they have a card with $30, they can lose like $2 a day. And the level of adherence with that group is like 89% at 1 year, which is just dramatically better than, you know, paying on the saying, we will pay you if you do something. And so there's a lot of focus on how do we make people as compliant with adherence as possible.
Sam, I think we have 2 more questions, if you can read them to us from the audience.
Sure. One of the questions that came in is, how are you prioritizing more aggressive timelines over quality for production during the pandemic?
I'm making sure, I don't want to see quality sacrifice for aggressive timelines. That always bites you in the end. It creates risk. What we actually asked some of the entrepreneurs, we asked the following question. What are the 3 to 5 risk areas that will be highly impacting your business? We want them to look at that, and quality of production or production timeline may affect them getting in the market, but we know that the liability and the risk level is too high. And as investors, we want to de-risk the investment. We don't want to see lawsuits. We don't want to see liabilities down the line. So therefore, I think we want to be aggressive, and there are ways to be aggressive without necessarily killing production. For example, one way to be aggressive in getting something in the market is don't implement it in the US, go to Australia or Europe first, because you can try it out there, then bring it in. I mean, that's the way I look at it. Greg, do you have a different view or an augmented view?
No, I'm right in line with you, David.
We had a question from Len Brandt. If you want to raise your hand, and actually we can open the mic. This will be the last question we'll take. So if you want to unmute yourself, you can actually ask your question and elaborate on it.
Well, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
If you know me, you know I don't turn down opportunities to open my mouth. So my question was that technology is undoubtedly presenting a myriad of potentially disruptive opportunities. What, in the nature of that technology, there's sometimes not as much proprietariness. And I wondered if this aspect, this old line viewpoint of highly protected breakthroughs, had sort of lost its relevance in the calibration of opportunities in our modern era from your perspectives, and particularly in healthcare. Thanks.
I'll give you a quick answer. It's, like I said before, it's probably number 5 on a list of the things we look at, because there could be a different IP that's out there. So I look at technology and the proprietariness as necessary, not sufficient to be successful.
Yeah, I'd agree. And it's always interesting to see what the intellectual property is. And when you see a lot of patents, I think it's important to look at what those are, what they're getting covered, because it might be the size of a screw or something bizarre like that, as opposed to something that's really defensible and really gives one protection in the market.
If you can you still hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, good. So I guess I don't really mean to ask about wasted, effort at intellectual property that doesn't truly protect a market opportunity. I'm actually asking, to the extent you're really looking for that. I understand that you're not looking for screws that don't affect things. I'm asking, is that really a big deal anymore? Or are markets in your mind just moving too fast and you just really rather have speed of execution by great teams that can do it?
Definitely, I'm not looking. When we look at new products, you can look at them as a different pricing model. We've seen those before. Entrepreneurs commit, and like in the real estate, we're going to do this, not that. You look at line extension. Well, they're doing this. We can do something a little bit better with a little different functionality. Then you can look at truly new to the world, the ones that are really transformative, and those are the ones we'd love to be able to see, because they will offer the greatest return longer term, either because they alone will make, money. You look at Illumina, you look at, their disruptive technology on gene sequencing. You look at the Da Vinci, machine for ISRG. Those were really transformative. They were basically unique. The proprietariness, was clearly there. Their IP was there. They made a difference, but it matched the proprietariness with the uniqueness of the market opportunity. And I think that's what I really like to see, that blending, that integration.